Welcome to Therapy in the Great Outdoors, the podcast where we explore the business and practice of nature-based pediatric therapy of all kinds. If you're an outdoor-loving pediatric practitioner in the fields of occupational, physical, or speech therapy, social work, or mental health, this podcast will help you start and grow a successful nature-based practice or program. I am the ever honest, always 100% real, you'll hear it all on this podcast, Dr. Laura Park Figueroa. I'm a pediatric OT with over 20 years of experience, and I run a thriving nature-based practice with profitable locations in 2 different states and multi-six figures in revenue. I also host the free online community at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com to help you pursue your nature-based therapy dreams too. Are you ready to take action on those dreams? Let's jump in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Therapy in the Great Outdoors. In this episode, I speak with John Arbuckle, who is a farmer. I've never had a farmer on the podcast before. He is a farmer who uses regenerative agriculture practices in all of his work on his land. And you are going to learn a lot of things about how you can make choices in your own life and maybe integrate some of these things into your work with children that will actually impact and heal the earth as a result of the food choices that we make. Let's dive into my episode with John and hear what he has to share with us. Hello, John.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Laura,
Yeah, great to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I just wanted to start out by saying I really respect what you do, the therapy in the outdoors. It's such a wonderful thing. And while I've never actually done the exact same protocols that you do, I just had so many experiences as a wilderness guide and a farmer that have just helped my heart stay balanced.
Yep.
So,
well, that's what
very
I
important.
think we should just kick off the whole conversation with having you introduce yourself, because this is a
Okay.
very interesting. So I'll frame this for everyone who will be listening. So John reached out to me through like the contact you support thing on the Tigo community or on my website. I don't even really know how you found me, but it's just interesting because I've never had a farmer reach out. It's always like therapists or other people. And his initial message to me was, hey, would you be interested in having a conversation about the therapeutic benefits of the outdoors on your podcast with me? I'm a farmer and I love wilderness adventures and used to be a wilderness guide, I think, and have done a bunch of wilderness things outside. And I said, well, I don't think my audience really needs convincing about the nature being transformational. But I looked up your website and realized that you were a farmer. And I was like, I know a conversation I want to have, because my life has been completely transformed by the addition of meat to my diet over the last several years. I was a long-term, mostly vegetarian. I wasn't strict about it. Like, I would occasionally eat meat. It was no big deal. But I had this false belief, as I think many people do, that veganism and vegetarianism is best for the environment. And I have never spoken about this on the podcast because I think even though I'm a very outspoken person, I live in this fear of offending people. I grew up in the Midwest, so we're just nice. And I'm like, I have this platform, I have this podcast, and I'm allowed to share my views on this podcast. I spend a lot of time doing this podcast. So I was like, John, come on the show. Let's talk about regenerative agriculture. So please introduce yourself. We can talk. I'm sure you have many thoughts after I share that, but introduce yourself and tell people who you are and kind of what your experience has been. And then we'll dive into like how you farm and all of the things.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Laura. So my name's John Arbuckle. I am married to a wonderful woman named Holly, and together we are the co-founders of Singing Pastures Farm. Singing Pastures Farm has been many things over the years. We have described it as a learning laboratory of the regenerative movement.
Cool.
We have been a brand. We've been a farmer's market farmer. We've sold in grocery stores. We've kind of explored a lot in that world. But I grew up on a large-scale conventional farm. We did
Interesting.
Yeah, we did everything exactly opposite of how I do it now. We did everything in a very conventional way up until I must have been in late high school, or maybe I was in college, but my sweet father, who farmed conventionally, which involved the use of synthetics and chemicals and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and guess how old he was? He was 47, right?
Wow.
Since then,
So young.
that is very young, for I am 48.
Yeah, it was
Right?
like, I'm 49. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's,
You don't want
yeah,
you don't want Parkinson's at 47. And so, you know how there are food deserts out there in the world? There are also information deserts. And there are wonderful farmers all across the Midwest who are doing their very best to be good stewards of their families and their communities, and are receiving the majority of their information from the chemical dealers. In our case, Monsanto's not
yeah,
really, a thing. They sold to Bayer, the Bayer Corporation from Europe. But at the time, they were a thing. And all of the Monsanto reps were very nice members of the community. They'd be sharing
yeah,
scientific information. And that's what I call, it's either an echo chamber where you're just bouncing the same ideas around the same
right.
room, or it's an information desert where outside ideas were having a very hard time getting in. That I loved my father dearly. He has since passed away. We have gone
Mhm.
on to see that there are something like 150 independent studies that correlate the use of herbicides and pesticides to Parkinson's and various other things that you don't want to get.
Interesting. It's not
150.
surprising, but it is interesting. Yeah.
It's not. It's a real disruptor of the biological world, and we have to guess that those disruptors are going to have downstream effects or side effects beyond their target.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was a big course correct for me, and I essentially began dismantling our conventional model. And at the
Wow.
same time, there was this thing, I had never heard the word regenerative. I think I might have heard the word sustainable, but I had no cultural reference. But I had
Interesting.
strong beliefs and strong conviction that there has to be a better way. And we just started inching our way and messing stuff up and making mistakes and breaking through the ice, and little by little creating something that is life-giving in every sense of the word. It's life-giving to the wildlife. This may sound
Yeah.
strange, but it's life-giving. The animals have this wonderful spa-like experience while they're in my care. The carbon drawdown that we're able to achieve is superior to any other form of farming. We can sequester more carbon and heal
Yes.
more ecosystems with livestock than anybody ever will. The impossible meat, they will not ever make that claim. While I have respect for the plant-based movement, the plant-based food movement,
Sure.
still, I mean, unless you grow your own garden, the plant-based movement is going to be exclusively based on gigantic tractors burning petroleum and tilling up what could be grassland
Yes.
and
And I
planting
think
an annual.
that is the thing that people do not think about. And I think I'm sure we'll get into a lot of these topics as we chat over the next 20 or 30 minutes. But I think a lot of times people don't realize the environmental cost of growing all of that plant matter. If you're going to eat, like for Impossible Burgers, for example, which I've heard their stock is like plummeting, like it's going like way down, right? Because I think people are hopefully that the message of regenerative agriculture and responsible farming of land that includes hooved animals to break up the soil. And I'm sure you can give us I want to hear more about your farm and how it all works. I think that would be really interesting for people. But I think people don't think about the cost of a plant-based diet. All that soy has to be grown. And it's not, yes, you're not killing I don't even know how much a cow weighs, a multi-thousand-pound animal or a multi-thousand-pound, 900-pound pig. I don't know. You're not killing a giant animal, but you're killing thousands of small animals in that land that is being farmed for the soybeans, right? Or whatever other cover crop or small plant crop that you're growing. So I think there's this myth that a lot of people subscribe to, and I did myself at one point in time, because I don't know, if you don't think about it too deeply, it just kind of makes sense. Don't eat animals. It's horrible to eat animals. Like, it's better for the earth if we just eat plants. But it's just not true. So talk to us a little bit, for those of us people who are listening, who this may be like, what in the world are they talking about? I don't know how many of them there will be. It'll be interesting. This is the first kind of I don't know if it's controversial. I don't think it is, but it'll be interesting to see the response to this episode, because I'll be interested if people knew about this or if this is something new. Talk to us about how your farm works and how it's different than. I got goosebumps when you said that part about it's wonderful for the animals and it feeds the environment in so many ways. And the animals have this spa-like experience when they're cared for by you. I literally got goosebumps. I felt goosebumps go down my arm, because it is like the way it should be to me when I think about regenerative agriculture and the farmers that are farming the way that you are farming your land. So tell us a little bit about how it works for people who may not know.
How does our farm work? Our farm works the same way the earth works. We like to
Mm.
say we've got 500 million years of research and development.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So our farm works in an ecological. It is not mechanical. It's not chemistry.
Mhm.
It's not large scale machinery. It's all outdoors. I work within a biological system.
Right.
And the important thing to think of is that we don't view the world through a reductionist lens. We view the world through a holistic lens. So when I look at my farm, I am looking at a single living thing that I am standing on the back of. My
Mm.
entire watershed is one beautiful and giant organism, and every plant and animal is a cell of that organism. And every plant group or animal group is an organ of that
Mhm.
ecosystem. And the various pathways that water flows through it are the veins, air moving
Yeah.
around, very close correlation with breath.
Yep.
There's summer and winter, it's awake, it's asleep, it's reproducing, it's
Yeah.
breathing, it creates waste. The waste goes back into the system. There's extreme amounts of diversity. So I start out with a quote from another farmer that says, if you want to make very small changes, then change the way you do things. If you want to make huge, oceanic, meaningful change, then you have to change the way you see things.
Mm.
Right? So if I were to change the way I do things, I would switch from conventional to organic, right? Which is good.
Right.
I'm not saying that these changing the way you do things, we can't ignore that completely, but it will always have a low ceiling for how much good you can accomplish. If you
Mm.
change the way you see things, then we're ceasing to see the earth as a resource and starting to see the earth as a partner. And when you have that cultural foundation of seeing the earth as a partner with likes and dislikes and good time to ask for something, bad time to ask for something, it's a
Mhm.
person that you're in relationship with. Then gratitude follows, and from gratitude comes meaningful change.
Yeah.
Um,
There's actually some interesting, listening to you speak about it, there's some interesting correlations with some of the work I do with nature-based therapists, where we talk about nature being a partner in the process of what we're doing with children, and nature being the research I did for my PhD. Like, all of these occupational therapists that I interviewed were saying that nature is a co-facilitator of the session with them. And
mhm.
it's like being in a relationship with someone. They used a lot of human words to describe nature. In fact, one of my dissertation, like, people on my committee wrote something like personification question mark or something, like you're making nature like a person. I'm like, hey, this was their words, not mine. Like, I'm like, I'm not
Sure.
trying to not be a good researcher. I'm actually just reporting what they said. So there's some interesting, the way you're speaking is also the way I hear people who do nature-based work speak about being in partnership with nature and in a relationship with nature that actually influences the therapy process the same way it may influence the farming process, where it's not this formulaic 2 + 2 = 4 kind of equation. It's like you're really having to dance. In my research, I called it dancing with nature. You're
Beautiful.
giving, nature's giving, we're kind of give and taking together. So I love that. I love that there's
Mhm.
some correlations there. I'm wondering when you first started doing this. So I'm familiar with Joel Salatin's work. I'm assuming that he was probably a piece that like,
Big inspiration.
yeah, big inspiration, right? Because he kind of is a speaker and leader and has kind of, you can go to his farm and in Virginia and tour what a regenerative agriculture farm looks like. But I think my questions for you would be like how I know on his farm he does a lot of the chickens are in a coop that's kind of rolled around to let their manure kind of, or not their manure, their droppings go into the ground. They eat the manure of the cow, and then the cows are moved from like pasture to pasture after or before the chickens. I don't, clearly I'm not a regenerative agriculture farmer, but I love when he describes
Great.
it because it's showing how you can have multiple animals moving through the same environment in a way that actually is healthy for the grass gets eaten by the cows and then the cows are moved to another pasture and that grass has a chance to regenerate. That's the regenerative word there. And
Mhm,
then the cows are kind of moved around and it just kind of works. Everything works in symbiosis, like that holistic word that you used.
mhm.
And it's in my understanding of it, my very limited understanding, industrial agriculture is kind of the opposite, right? Like I live in Wisconsin and when I see these fields of corn and soybeans all around me, I'm like, there's no regeneration here. Like they actually can only plant them for a few years and then it has to lay fallow for a while because the ground is so there's no nutrients left for the corn to grow back up. So is that accurate or am I missing kind of key?
Hmm. No, you're right on. And so one of my life philosophies is I think everybody is doing the best they can. You know what I mean? I think my
Sure.
my
Yeah.
dad
Yeah.
was
That's a
in that mix. He was doing the best he could. He just didn't have access to all the information. And if he had, maybe he would have made different decisions. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. But what I like to think is I think that transformation is one of my favorite qualities of human beings. Imagining that where we start out life, and then one of our fundamental potentialities is that we extract ourselves from something that we don't like, and then we create something that we do. That's what
yeah.
transformation is for me. So
Yeah.
when I took over our family farm, I took all the pigs. I'm kind of a pig guy. It sounds funny to say how all teachers have a grade that they really do the best in.
Right.
All farmers, like cow farmers and apple growers, they almost can't talk to each other. You think they're
Because
all
they have their
farmers,
thing.
and they're
That's
just
funny.
like it's like kindergarten teachers and college professors. Like they're all talented, but
Right.
they might not have a lot as much to talk about as you might think.
That's so funny.
So, how did we start our transformation from going from conventional to regenerative? And why did we do it? And what did we see when we did it? Well, first thing we did was we took all the pigs out of the pig barns. We had this very factory kind of setup. I changed the genetics. We had all these modern white pigs that all looked like clones of each other. For all I knew,
Mm,
they were clones of each other. And we started using the old-fashioned pigs. And then we put them outside and they would build nests for themselves and they loved to graze and they knew how to
mm,
find worms and acorns and black. But they just had it in their head. They already knew. Nobody
yeah.
had to teach them. And we took out all the antibiotics and we took out all the genetically modified feed ingredients. And then once we had taken out, we'd found the list of no-nos that we wanted to delete. Then we started a list of what is it that we want to create.
Mm,
And in that, we came across the concept of biomimicry. Like we farm the same way that the bison
yeah.
managed the grassland 1,000 years ago. It's going to be a group of animals tightly bunched and continuously moving. Imagine
Yeah.
the bison in enormous herds, trampling, manuring, grazing, and then they would go on to the next spot where the grass was growing, and they wouldn't come back until the grass had a very long and adequate recovery period.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they just walked around in small circles, nipping off the bud every time it stuck out an inch
Right.
of
Right.
new growth. That's very destructive. That's a form of mining,
Yeah.
continuous grazing. So tightly bunched, and traditionally there were timber wolves keeping the bison in a big super organism, this big pack, like the penguins on the South Pole,
Yep.
or the wildebeest swimming across, a river that's full of alligators in Africa,
Mhm.
tightly bunched by timber wolves. I would love it if we had timber wolves. We don't, so we use electric fence. Our electric fence keeps them tightly bunched,
Yeah.
continuously moving. When the animals have eaten roughly 50% of the available biomass, we have about 35 2-acre paddocks.
Okay.
There's a lot more land here. We're about 200 acres, but there's a lot of wild stuff that we don't send animals into. It's really the sanctuary of the wild.
Yeah.
We just want it for wild species. So 35, 1.8, 2-acre paddocks. The animals, depending on the weather, if it's raining, the regrowth is faster. If it's later in the year, the animals are bigger and their impact is heavier. So it's
Mhm.
somewhat non-formulaic. It's non-linear. It's very fluid.
Yeah.
But roughly, for the sake of conversation, once the animals have consumed 50% of the available biomass of a 2-acre paddock, the next paddock is already built. The electric fence is already up. We just open a gate and they literally run through it.
They're like,
And so
"Yippee, new
happy.
food."
They're like waiting for me at the gate latch. And as soon as I open it, it's like a stampede.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and the beautiful thing to me is, while we've got 200 acres, we're only going to have animals on about 3 or 4 at any given moment.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that, I mean, what percentage is that? That is a very high percentage of our available
Mhm.
land that is open to wild turkeys and coyotes and badgers and
Yeah.
deer, all sorts of stuff. And they're going to be doing whatever their business is on the
Right.
other 97% of our farm, which is open to them, which as much as I love the beauty of a big cornfield, there is no wildlife.
No.
Whatever was not killed was displaced, and I'd have a
Right.
hard time explaining the difference to a 5-year-old. There are no vacant spaces out there just waiting for someone to leave their niche and go to another one. If it's either killed or displaced in a monoculture, whereas we're the opposite of a monoculture. We want maximum diversity, maximum
Yeah.
diversity of wildlife, maximum diversity of farm animals, forage animals that the animals are consuming.
Yeah.
And I guess that's how we farm. We farm the way nature, I shouldn't say it that way, because farming implies human beings as like the top tier. And we're not the top tier. We're not making the music, but we do play a small leadership role in being the conductor of the orchestra that helps the music to be made. We're not the source of the music,
Right. Right.
but we are playing a part. We can't
Yeah.
ignore.
You're like
Yeah.
working in partnership with nature to produce food the way that it has been for eons,
Forever,
right?
so long as
Like,
people have been eating.
yeah, exactly. Oh, I was going to ask you something. Are you familiar with the book and the documentary Sacred Cow?
Oh, I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen it.
Okay, so that was something I was going to put in the show notes for everyone listening because that was the book that completely I knew about Joel Salatin's work forever ago because I lived in Berkeley, California, and he came and spoke there one time. And it's like the hub of you should do everything organic, everything regenerative,
Mhm,
everything in tune with
mhm,
the earth if you live in
mhm.
Berkeley. So he came and spoke, and I heard him years and years ago, probably almost 20 years ago now, but still was mostly vegetarian. And then I want to say it was like 4 years ago, maybe. Diana Rogers, so she runs a business called Sustainable Dish. And she used to have a podcast. It's probably still out there. She doesn't publish it anymore. She decided it wasn't worth the time and energy she was putting into it, which I can relate to. It's like nobody realizes how much
Yeah,
time goes into producing a podcast. But she and Rob Wolf, he has written books about the paleo diet, like basically meat and vegetables are what are healthy for you. That would be his
yeah.
perspective. But they made this documentary called Sacred Cow: The Case for Better Meat. And I think my husband maybe found out about it and said, maybe we should watch this, or whatever, because he's always eaten meat. He loves meat. My kids love meat. And I watched it and was just blown away because it showed me how misled I was, or how I just didn't know. I just wasn't educated on understanding the impact, or just how important it is that we have hoofed animals, like animals with hooves to break up the earth to make the soil healthy. Like it's so important. And their manure and all the things. Like, and it just kind of was a light bulb moment for me. And from then on, like and then I started doing more research about my protein needs as I get older. And it's really hard to do that on a plant-based diet. So I just feel like a different person. And there's a big joke in our house that if my older two children would have gotten to eat meat as much as my youngest child, then they would be like 3 inches taller or something. They're like, Ray gets all the meat. You feed him meat all the time. It's so funny.
That's great.
He's 14 and he's taller than me. So something's working with him eating this much meat. But and I guess sometimes what would you say to, I know sometimes people, and I resonate with this, people bring up the idea that like, yeah, regenerative agriculture is great and it's all good and well if you can afford it, right? If you can afford to buy your organic free range pork and ground beef or whatever. But I'm interested what you would say to the people who would say that it's kind of an elitist thing to be able to afford that. Is it better to buy just the regular ground beef for nutrition because we need that as humans? Or what would you say to that kind of topic or that question?
I think that food choices, whatever we consume, is kind of a personal question. And I leave that for everyone to work out, with my respect, just on their own. I'll
Yep,
say I can describe my chain of thinking.
I would
And
love it.
if other people relate to that, then hooray. But I feel really good when I'm not eating a lot of carbs. And if I get away from a meat and vegetable diet, my carb count usually goes up, my weight goes up, my mood
Hmm.
fluctuates with my glycemic level in my
Yep.
bloodstream. You don't get your best John on a high carb diet. My name's John for everybody. So you don't get your best John Arbuckle. I won't be my best self on a high carb diet. And I really do, in my, belief system, I really believe that we require, in order to be a creative influence on the earth, we require animals. I'm not familiar with any ecosystems other than big monocultures of grain that are void of animals. In fact,
Right.
all of the grassland ecosystems and forests on Earth, literally over the course of hundreds of millions of years, co-evolved under the evolutionary pressure of large grazing animals and a whole bunch of little other ones. Grazing animals were something like the glaciers, pushing their way through, changing things.
Right.
And the two created a symbiosis. If we
Yeah.
take on this reductionist thinking that we're looking at separate entities, then we can start to dissect it, which I'm not quite as into. If we're looking at an ecosystem as one thing, not a reductionist way of thinking, but a holistic way of thinking, we just see that large grazing animals are a part of the digestive system of the ecosystem, which is
Hmm.
taking high fiber, very coarse roughage and leaves and blades of grass and stems, and is digesting that. And then their manure goes back out onto the ground as something that is pre-digested. The cow is literally the stomach of the watershed, or the bison, or the
Hmm.
zebra, or the caribou. All of these things is having a very beautiful kind of designed into the system, if you want to think of it that way, or not.
Yeah.
It's really a requirement. And do you mind if I just take a moment, and I'm going to kind of go do a deep dive into being a nerd
I
and
love
just
it.
explain why that is, just from a mechanical, chemical perspective,
Yeah.
photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis and why is it the coolest thing you've ever heard of? So, photosynthesis, I'm sharing my inner nerd. I'm going to
That's
show
great. I
the
love it.
chemical equation of photosynthesis, and then we'll get into why that's important. Photosynthesis is 6 carbon dioxide molecules combine with 6 water molecules. Carbon
Hmm.
dioxide, water. Put them together, run them through the machinery of a plant, and what drops out the other side? It's going to create one giant molecule of sugar, which scientifically would be described as C6H12O6, giant complicated basketball of sugar.
Okay.
More than half of that sugar leaks out the roots of the plant into the ground. So C6, that is 6 molecules of carbon going from the atmosphere into the ground. Okay, this is carbon drawdown if it stays.
Yep.
And with one little exhale, it exhales 6 molecules of oxygen. So we see a beautiful example of simplicity and elegance in action. It's almost poetry. When the plants breathe out, the animals breathe in.
Yeah.
And how does this happen? This happens historically, and I'm saying historically over the millions of years kind of
Right.
time. Large groups of grazing mammals trample the grassland to smithereens. Basically, what we do is we wait until the grasses are starting to develop their seed head, or are almost just right before they put on their seed head. They have the most biomass, the most carbs, the most protein, the most availability of nutrition. As soon as it's got its seed head on, I don't know if you've ever eaten bolted lettuce.
Yes.
Maybe it tastes like
It doesn't
crap.
taste good.
Cow and grass in a pasture are the same way. Once the grass bolts, you just look at the graph. The protein, the digestibility, the flavor is just going down the drain. So what we want to do is we want all of our grazing animals to stampede it, just like the bison, right? That's
Yeah.
my role model here. We want
Yeah.
them to trample it significantly, intensely, just like the bison would have. And then just like the bison, we need our animals to leave and not come back until the circle is back to the starting point.
Right.
Seed head is starting to come again. We call that hitting the reset button, right?
Okay.
If the grasses in a cow pasture are allowed to create a seed head, and then the plant has wrapped up its life cycle, it thinks it's done, it made seeds, that's the end of the story, right?
Right.
Then it turns brown. The decomposition process releases all of that carbon back into the atmosphere. Very little progress is made. And if you take animals out of the system completely and you do that year over year for 100 years, you've lost more than you gain.
Yeah.
Alternatively, we're going to be grazing our paddocks about every 35 days. In the springtime, it's closer to 21. If there's a terrible drought in August, it's closer to 60. We're just kind
Okay.
of rolling with what
Yeah.
nature tells us to do. Nature's a boss, right? So if we can hit the reset button 4 times in a growing season, I guarantee, without any reservation, I 100% promise that any farmer that's doing that is sequestering more carbon than they're releasing.
Yes.
Methane, yes, the cow creates methane, right? If you put it all together into a holistic equation of goodness being done relative to damage being done,
Right.
I mean, there were 40 million bison in America in 1491. There
Not
were
that long
always
ago.
tens of millions of large grazing mammals out grazing and farting, creating methane.
Right. Right.
This
Right.
is not new, but the trouble is now we do it in an industrial way. And what I would really like to see farmers doing for the greatest human health, animal health, planetary health is they just keep hitting the reset button. They let the grass get big, they chomp it down, they don't come back for a month and a half. They
Right.
do that over and over again, and you will literally increase the altitude of your property with carbon, right?
Yeah.
You'll be drawing it down. You are building soil, and your property is getting taller. I mean, very incrementally,
Yeah.
very
Sure.
slowly,
Yeah.
but that's what's happening. And that's why I am so excited about healing the earth and healing human health with animals. I'm probably not going to do it with a tractor. I'm not going to do it with soybeans. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do it with 1,000 acres of corn. I mean, that's why the Mississippi River is brown.
Yeah.
right? That's brown because so much of the ecosystems, the soil within the Mississippi watershed is so damaged.
So destroyed.
It
Yeah.
is a wounded organism. It
Yeah.
is an organism that needs to go to the hospital,
Yeah.
right? Neglect and ignoring it is not the way to rewild. We have to apply tender loving care and thought. I mean,
Yeah.
we could rewild a system that had all the original components, like timber wolves and grizzly bears and bison. If those
Hmm.
were present in Iowa and we left something alone, it might rewild,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? In the absence of those things, where it's just there's a sweet, loved family pet that's hungry and we're not feeding it.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's what neglect is, and we just need to feed our loved and trusted pet.
Yeah, I do feel like there is I'm encouraged by the movement of people who are following the work you do and following Joel Salatin and Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers and all these people who are kind of bringing to the forefront the understanding of how can we, if we're not farmers, eat in a way that can support people like you who are farmers who are doing things correctly. And I do think this is like something that I personally feel very passionately about is looking for the opportunities in your local community to support, even if it's in a small way. If you don't have a lot of money, you still can in small ways support the local farmers that are near you who are doing this. And I always say that if we ever leave Wisconsin, one of the saddest things to me will be that we will no longer get to be the drop-off site for the
Mm,
regenerative agriculture farm that does like raw milk and
how
pasture raised
beautiful.
meat and all this. We have 7 coolers on the side of our house. Sometimes
Yeah.
neighbors are like, "Why do you have all those coolers?" "Oh, there's a farm that drops off here on Friday. Here's the info if you want to join the co-op."
Oh,
So we get like all of our eggs and meat and, well, not all of our meat. We do still buy meat at Costco sometimes because when we have 3 kids here, it's a lot, but they don't
yeah.
all live at home anymore. But when they are home, wow, they eat a lot. I remember this whenever they come home. so
Yeah.
so we do a mix, but I do think that all of us can do our part to know if there are farmers locally that we could support, even if you can't afford to get all of your meat from them, at least to know they're there, at least to somehow support them, because it is a way that we can care about the earth by supporting farmers that are doing the kind of work that you're doing. So I'm just very thankful
Yeah.
for the work you've done over the years and for sharing all of this with us. It's so interesting. Tell people where they can find you. Let's like wrap up and
Yeah. Sure
give them
thing.
their website and where they can find you. And I got to order some of those. I want some, they have pineapple like meat sticks, and I'm about to go on an international trip where I need snacks. So I'm about to go
Mm,
order some today, John. But tell
yeah.
people what you have available and stuff. I'm very
Yeah, that was actually the most complicated part of becoming a regenerative farmer is figuring out once we weren't selling at the sale barn or taking our grain to the elevator, what do we do? So this is something that I'm sure my father would respect but have a hard time relating to.
yeah,
I built this really amazing website. So he put a lot of, investment into like tractors and machinery. I have put a lot of investment into like things like search engine optimization.
right.
Things that I think my father and grandfather would have a hard time really grasping.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's funny.
but yeah, I mean the name of our farm is Singing Pastures. You can find us at singingpastures.com. We are predominantly a meat snack business now. So we raise our animals. I say at the end of their life, we wave a magic wand over them and they turn into smoked sausages and salami.
Oh.
We have 3 flavors of craft meat sticks. We say they're kind of like a fancy version of a Slim Jim.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one that's made with little pieces of bacon. There's one that's made with little chunks of dehydrated pineapple, which is really, that's kind of my favorite. And then there's a spicy one that's made with little chunks of jalapeno. And then there's also 2 kinds of salami. There's one that's kind of a zany and decadent flavor. It's bourbon and bacon. And then another one is kind of an old standby, which is red wine and garlic. And
Oh yeah, those sound good too.
yeah, that's what we make.
Yum. I love it. Well, I'm about to get some of those pineapple ones because my middle child and I are going to Nepal and Indonesia. So I've traveled very minimally outside the US. So this is like a huge trip for us. He has a friend
Mm.
whose mom has worked in Nepal for many years. So they invited us to come because they're going to be there. And I'm a little nervous, I admit, about going without meat for as long as we're going to be
Yeah.
staying there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought I would pack some Slim Jims from your company in my bag to have to eat in
Yeah.
secret if I need to, because it's a lot. I mean, I'm sure it'll be delicious. It's like a lot of lentils and vegetarian stuff, but yeah, I'm already thinking about needing my meat stash while I'm there for a few weeks. So,
That was actually one of my hiatuses from farming, is I worked as a wilderness, like an adventure travel guide in Nepal.
oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, I did an Annapurna circuit. This is part of why I like to reach out and just learn
Yeah.
about like, nature therapy, is because it was so
Yeah.
therapeutic for me to just be walking along and like looking up at these 20,000-foot mountains, or hiking the
Yeah.
Annapurna circuit, or running all these rivers on the Tibetan border. If you get to Nepal, say you can find one of the local people and say Tapailai Kasta Cha,
Okay.
which means how are you in Nepali.
Great. I'll practice that
Yeah.
episode a bunch of times and repeat that 3-second segment you just said. So his mom, her name's Karen. Karen speaks Nepali.
Right.
She actually learned it like 30 years ago. She has been going back and forth over the years to work at
Mm,
a young kid. I don't know if they call it an elementary school there, but like a young kids school, like a primary school.
mhm.
So she's going to be in Namche Bazaar. So we're staying there for a
Oh,
few we're probably going to be actually in Namche for about a week because it's probably going to take a total of 5 days, I want to say, from like when we leave from California, we're leaving. It's probably going to take 5 days by the time we get there, right? It's pretty remote.
yeah.
And then
Wow.
I don't know, we might do some trekking up towards Everest Base Camp. I don't think we have time to go the
Hmm.
whole the whole way
Hmm.
there, but she sent a photo the other day to our little WhatsApp thread that we have going. My son is surprising his friend. So their son, my son's best friend, does not know that my son is coming. And
Oh yeah.
we're just going to show up in Kathmandu and be like, "Hey, hi, how you doing?" We can't wait. I'm sure my son is really good at planning surprises, so
Yeah.
I think he's going to come up with some crazy scheme to surprise him somehow. So we'll see what he comes up with. But yeah, so she actually speaks the language, and I feel like it's comforting to go knowing that we'll have her with us because she knows people there. Like it's her friends, 'cause she's
Yeah.
gone for many years. So anyway,
Mm. You have
so
a
yeah.
great time.
Yeah, I can't, it's like a trip of a lifetime. I can't believe my son would even want to go with me. He was telling me they invited him, and I was like, Lucas, that's where Everest is.
Hmm.
I can't believe you're gonna get to see Everest. And he was like, you should come with me.
Wow, what
And
a
then I
sweet
said,
invitation.
are you kidding me? You
Yeah.
really want me to come with? Are you sure? Like I could come
Yeah.
with you?
Yeah. Oh, how
So
wonderful. That's heartwarming
yeah,
to hear.
yeah. So then it's all happening, and then we're gonna go to Indonesia. After that, to Raja Ampat, which is like this very remote, where there's some of the only healthy coral reefs in the world. Speaking of like
Wow.
keeping the world healthy. And then on the way home, we have an 11.5 hour layover in Tokyo. So we're going to leave the airport and go into Tokyo, Japan. So I'm going to get 3 new places on my
Mm,
little passport this trip. I'm really
mm,
excited.
mm. Oh,
Anyway,
I'm so excited for you. That sounds like a delightful trip.
yeah, it's going to be great. Thank you so much, John. This was such a great conversation. I just appreciate you and your philosophy, and it was just delightful. So thank you
Yeah.
for the work you do.
Yeah, thanks so much. If I had one concluding idea for everybody listening, it would be that transformation is very possible. We already
Mm,
know the why. We just have to work out the how.
yeah, I love that. Great note to end on. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
So after we recorded, John sent me an email with a discount code for all of you if you want to buy some of the meat sticks that his company makes. They are made the slow way, the right way, and they do not use all of the additives and things that you find in meat sticks that you may get at the grocery store. You can go to singingpastures.com and you can get 20% off with the discount code wilderness20. Okay, that's it. See you next time. Hey, before you go, if this podcast has helped you in your nature-based work, will you take 1 minute to leave a 5-star review for the podcast wherever you're listening right now? it helps me keep producing free content for you when I see that it is actually having an impact in the world. So thank you so much for doing that. And now go get outside and enjoy therapy in the great outdoors. See you next week.